is pulled up yet. Doesn't look like she is. So let's see here. So pardon us while we try to get everybody up to be a panelist in our WebEx process. Okay. And I do see a number of familiar names on the attendee list. Thank you very much for participating today. And as soon as we get Christina Jackson up, we'll get her speaking and also um, hopefully get slides that can be shown. And actually, let me see if I have the slides for tonight. Because if we continue to have these technical problems, perhaps I can go through the slides. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience as we get through this. Okay, we're still waiting to get folks on the panelist section. Now, if someone could allow me to share content, then I do have the slides and I can get those, I can show those slides and walk through while we're getting Christina Jackson online. So if someone could give me the right to share my screen. All right, we're getting closer. I see a big white page on the screen there. There we go. Oh, all right. We see the welcome to web tour. Now, I think we get to the PowerPoint slides, we'll be there. Still looking at getting closer. Okay, that's the whiteboard, which is blank. Okay, getting closer. Okay, now just waiting on those slides. There we go. Ah, all right. So good. Lisa, please make that, if you could, find the um, find the slide button so that fits your screen if it's there. Well, anyway, this is getting close. Let's see. Yeah, go to page view perhaps. Lisa, you can just go to the next slide then. We'll see if we can get it in the screen. All righty. Okay, so I'm going to go through what Christina Jackson, our Chief Financial Officer, would normally be doing, but this is good information for everybody. Again, this information is contained in various places online. There's a summary, but I'll just work through these budget highlights. So the advertised budget is a budget that the county executive, Christina Jackson, and the county executive worked to propose. It's really a proposed budget. And in the advertised budget, it assumes a real estate tax that's unchanged of $1.14 per $100 of assessed value. This would result in the rather unlucky increase on average to Fairfax County homeowners of approximately $666. So also included in the advertised budget is $80 million for the board's consideration, which could be used in whole or in part for reducing the real estate tax rate. To jump ahead a little bit, a single penny on the real estate tax equals approximately $29 million, between $29 and $30 million. So 30 million roughly per each penny per $100 of assessed value on real estate tax. The advertised budget does fully fund school operating request. Schools do represent a little more than half of the general fund budget. This advertised budget also includes funding for county's compensation, county employees getting a 4.01% market rate adjustment, which is the first year in a couple of years that it's advertised to be consistent with basically the process and the formula that the county has been trying to meet during previous years. Also, there are performance merit and longevity increases included in the budget, including a new 25-year longevity for uniform public safety. And then there are a number of adjustments associated with market studies. So the advertised budget does include some investments, affordable housing, diversion first, the co-responder model, and then some of the other items that are mentioned there. So some of the items included in this advertised budget were approved earlier. For example, the co-responder model and the positions funded I believe in our mid-year budget, using stimulus funds are now funded in the recurring budget, and that would include 27 positions for that. So it also, if you could move your cursor there, Lisa, I'm missing the bottom of that. Okay. It also begins to implement recommendations from the schools. There's a joint county schools capital improvement committee. Not all the recommendations are included, but some of them are. Okay, go ahead down to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, you really can't see the top, but this slide shows the changes. There we go. All right, the annual change in general fund revenues. What you can see there is the pandemic really did hit general fund revenues in 2021 and 2022, those fiscal years. The orange bar is very important. That was the federal aid that we got through stimulus funding. So we'll pause right now and see, actually, Christina might be able to come up and be a panelist, which is good because it's about to get a lot harder. Glad to have Christina take it from here, but let's see. All right, waiting for. All right. Uh, hmm. See if we can get Christina pulled up here.
Am I unmuted?
There, Christina, I hear you.
I just saw the little button change from red to black, so I thought that was a good sign.
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you or can't see slides, but this is a really good start.
We're getting there.
Okay, so Christina is online, and Lisa, if you could put these slides back up and start. Christina, we got to slide 3.
Okay.
And I walked through the first couple of slides and got to the annual change in general fund revenue. Either that or, Lisa, if you could give host to. Okay, hold on. Okay, so Lisa should go to slide 3. Okay, oh, here we go. So I am now the presenter. That's good. Okay, we're going to do this. All right, so let's see if I can get this. Christina, it might not be the best slide presentation format-wise that anyone's ever driven for you, but how is that?
That's fine by me.
Okay, good. Let's go with that. So take it from here.
Okay. So this is the slide that we typically use showing our annual change in general fund revenue. So you can see, might not be able to see, but the blue column, the 6.8% represents the projected growth in FY 2023. And we're going to talk in a little bit about what's really driving that growth. And you can see in the current fiscal year that 1.3%, we're projecting, very minor growth at 0.7% was in FY 2021, which is really the year that was impacted by the pandemic. And as I think you mentioned, Supervisor Alcorn, those orange bars include the one-time stimulus funding that the county had received, which is why 2020 is at 7%. That was that $200 million that we received through the CARES Coronavirus Relief Fund. And so certainly with that being one time, it dropped off the next fiscal year. So really the blue bars are what is indicative of our normal general fund revenue. But then on the next slide, we'll start talking about really what's driving the growth that we're seeing in FY 2023. And certainly a big part of it is real estate. And I would draw everybody's attention to the bottom right-hand portion of the chart where you can see that in 2023, right now, we're projecting our total real estate tax base to increase about 8.57%. That's primarily being driven by residential equalization of 9.57%. And then we did see a positive non-residential number this year. We were actually projecting that non-residential might be slightly negative after being negative last year. But fortunately, that turned around and non-residential has increased marginally, 2.27%. Although I would note that a big portion of that was driven by apartments. I think that apartment growth is really what drove that number up. And our biggest category, for example, office elevator, was actually relatively flat. So it's kind of mixed messaging in that non-residential number. On the residential side, that 9.57 really is driven by the fact that folks have been moving up to larger homes. We're seeing the bigger increases in our single family homes versus the condos and the townhomes because interest rates have been really low. Because I think a lot of our residents are looking to maybe permanent teleworking status. They're looking for larger homes. And so I think that's really what's driven that big increase in residential equalization. And the last thing that I'll note on this slide, just because it's important, is on the left, the projected value of a penny on the real estate tax rate is just under $30 million, or about $29.4 million, which I know will come into play as I'm sure there are several board members who are looking to reduce the real estate tax rate for 23. Then on the next slide, we don't usually spend a lot of time talking about personal property, but this year is an anomaly. And so certainly I think that folks are probably aware, if you've been in the market to buy a new car, or perhaps you've gone to sell a used vehicle, that car prices have really soared. Due to the pandemic, we know that supply chains have been impacted. A lot of the technological components that are now included in cars are unavailable. And so we've seen significant increases in vehicle values, which has impacted our personal property tax projections. When we put together the advertised budget, we were basing our numbers on November data from J.D. Power, which is where we get our vehicle valuation information. And at that time, it was looking like the average vehicle value would be up a little over 15%. And normally those November numbers aren't very far from the January numbers, which is what we use for personal property tax bills. And so the advertised budget, again, was built on that 15.5% average increase in vehicle values. But once we actually got the final numbers from J.D. Power for January, the increase was even greater, over 30%, as you can see from the slide. And so as a result, beyond the revenues that we actually have included in the advertised, there's more than $80 million if the board took no action to try to mitigate the impact on taxpayers. The bottom bullet there mentions that we were going to discuss options at the March 15th Budget Committee meeting. We did. And staff's recommendation to the board was to implement an assessment ratio. This is something that's allowed by Virginia Code, where the board can decide to take a certain reduction in the assessments for vehicles. Staff is recommending a 15% discount. So vehicles would be valued at about 85% of the J.D. Power valuation. And as a result, that additional revenue, we know 83 million on the slide, that additional revenue would go away, and we would be returned back to the advertised revenue. And additionally, instead of the average increase in the tax bill being over $180, it would be about $78. I think it's important to note that we still are required to value vehicles according to their fair market value. We had a discussion with the board that, could we increase that reduction? But I do think it's important to note that there has been an increase in vehicle values. And so because we are required to value those vehicles at fair market value, staff believes that with that 85% ratio, that we are valuing vehicles appropriately. But certainly the board still has to take formal action to adopt that assessment ratio. And so that'll be included as part of the board's markup package and the ultimate motions that the board approved as part of the adopted. So the board still has to take those steps if that recommendation is something that the board wants to pursue. The next slide, and there's a lot of numbers here, and I'm going to try to hit the high points. But this is really just a summary of what's included in the advertised budget. You can see at the top that our revenue increase, again, at our current real estate tax rate of $1.14, is about $389 million. There are some reductions that you can see in that chart. The first one is a little over $12 million. That's associated with the action that the board took a couple of months ago to enhance our tax relief for seniors and those with disabilities. And we expect some additional enhancements to the program for next year. But that revenue loss, again, of a little over $12 million is associated with increased asset and income limitations with our tax relief program. That program hadn't been changed in a number of years. You also see a reduction there of $5 million. That is redirecting revenue to affordable housing initiatives. And then you can see the reduction of $42.6 million. There's a commensurate reduction on the expenditure side, so it's net zero. That's associated with staff's recommendation to shift our Land Development Services Agency, which is currently sitting in the general fund, but shifting that to its own special revenue fund in order to be more transparent with the development community regarding how those fees and those revenues are utilized, and provides a little bit more flexibility for LDS to be able to respond to their workload. So at the end of the day, our projected revenue increase is a little over $330 million. And I should have noted originally, but these numbers are changes from last year's adopted budget. So these are the incremental numbers. And then when you look at the requirements, you see we've broken out both county and schools. A big portion for the county, over $100 million, is related to employee compensation. And again, we have fully funded the county's compensation package as part of this proposal. There's a little bit there for our required debt service payments. We'll talk a little bit more about the joint county school CIP recommendations in a moment. So right now I'll skip over that $2.5 million, both for county and schools. And then you can see those categories are in line with the priority outcome areas as included in the countywide strategic plan. And we've done this now for, I believe, a couple of years. Lifelong education and learning, certainly the biggest piece there, that $112.65 million, is the full funding of the school board's school operating request. That health number, $15.05 million, is primarily for initiatives including the expansion of our Diversion First program, as well as baseline funding that we've included to expand our school health program and add a significant number of school health nurse positions in response to an action by the state or an unfunded mandate by the state. Those positions were originally funded with stimulus funding, but we need to put the baseline funds in. We have over $12 million there for mobility and transportation. That's primarily reflective of the county's operating support for Metro. We have over $12 million for effective and efficient government. That includes funding for our Office of Elections, some of our technology infrastructure support, as well as funding and positions for a new language access program, which was also a directive by the board in order to allow us to have materials online and even printed that are more accessible to our residents, and certainly those residents that don't speak English as a primary language. You can see there's over $10 million for empowerment support for residents facing vulnerability. That includes a 5% increase in our consolidated community funding pool, as well as baseline funds for our co-responder model. That was another initiative, again, that was initially funded with stimulus dollars. We've included additional investments in safety and security. A big portion of that is staffing for the New Scotts Run Fire Station. We've included almost $5 million in support for culture and recreational opportunities. That includes funding for a number of new facilities, including the Lorton and Sully Community Centers, the Patriot Park North Complex, and a new equity program for the Park Authority. And then the remaining categories include investments in new school-age childcare rooms. We've included 5 positions to support affordable housing. So although I've noted the housing and neighborhood livability, that $1.52 million seems like a small investment, I would note the $5 million in redirected revenue at the top, as well as the fact that the board has appropriated $30 million in the county's ARPA funds for affordable housing as well. So I think that's important to keep in mind. You see that we've got a little over $3 million in savings after we fund our reserves, because we are fully funding our reserves at the 10% target. Then we have an available balance for the board's consideration of about $79.26 million. And then on the next slide, the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit more about capital. And again, ordinarily in these presentations, we focus on operating, but because we did have the Joint County School CIP Committee, we wanted to make sure that we focused on capital as well as part of this presentation. Over the past year, we met with the committee. That included representation from the Board of Supervisors as well as the school board and the Planning Commission. On the Board of Supervisors, it included Supervisor Smith and Supervisor Faust. The committee released their recommendations in October, and the board endorsed those recommendations in December. And you can see the recommendations included on this slide. That included increasing our annual bond sale limit from $300 to $400 million. Because that does result in increased debt service requirements, we're recommending that be gradually implemented over time. So we would start with a $50 million increase, 25 each for the county and schools, as part of our next bond sale in January 2023, and then we would bump it up again in January 2025. The committee also recommended to dedicate the equivalent of 1 penny on the real estate tax rate, which again is about $29.4 million, to be utilized for both those increased debt service requirements on that increased sales number, as well as to increase our investments for capital pay down. And then the last recommendation was to increase the percentage that we allocate to our capital sinking fund at year end. Right now that's 20%. The recommendation is to increase it to 30%. And then for the first time to include schools in that allocation as well. Because that really is not an annual budget issue. The 23 advertised budget doesn't speak to that specific recommendation, but I would anticipate that is one that the board's going to see us implement as part of our carryover review, which we'll release to the board in July. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about what is included in the 23 advertised budget in relation to those recommendations. We have assumed those increased bond sales, and the chart here on this slide lays out where the county ultimately moves from $120 million limit to $170, and schools will go from 180 to 230 over the course of the next few years. Based on our available revenues, we did not recommend the equivalent of a full penny in 23. Instead, we have recommended a $5 million investment, again, split evenly between the county and schools. The increased sales in January 2023 actually don't impact our budget into FY 2024. So that full $5 million would be available for the county and schools to be used for pay down. And we would certainly anticipate that this investment is going to increase over time, not only to accommodate the increased debt service requirements on the increased bond sales, but also to continue our investments in our pay down programs. And then on the next slide, we talk about some same changes we've also recommended to our referendum plan. I think that the conversations with the Joint CIP Committee really spurred a really hard look at our bond program, especially in light of some of the challenges that we've been experiencing in recent years. We have a pretty significant backlog of bonds that have been approved by the voters, but they have not yet been sold. And even with the increases in the annual bond sales as recommended by the Joint CIP Committee, it's still going to be tight for us to continue to sell those bonds, or to be able to sell those bonds over the next couple of years and be able to do so under our limits. And so we're requesting some changes to our bond referendum plan. That includes deferring many of our county referendum by at least 2 years, and shifting to an every 6-year referendum plan instead of every 4. I should note that we've gotten a lot of feedback from advocates for parks, and we certainly may speak to that later, but I would say that we've had really good conversations with parks regarding how we can be sure that we can meet their needs even if we move to a 6-year plan. Right now, Parks gets $100 million every 4 years. What you'll see, and I don't want us to move to the next slide yet, but what you'll see on the next slide is that we have $100 million slotted for the next park referendum. But certainly we are still continuing to talk to parks, and our goal is to make sure that we size that referendum appropriately given the needs that they have. At an earlier budget town hall last week, I noted that we include $100 million for parks every 4 years, and it's a static number, but certainly the needs of the park system are not static. So we want to make sure that we're responsive. We have recommended that there be no county referendum in November 2022. That was going to be a pretty small referendum anyway, primarily with public safety. And public safety has some significant unsold bonds, and they have a lot of projects that have been delayed. And so we don't think that that's really going to that's going to impact the progress that they were otherwise going to be able to make anyways, given the number of unissued bonds they have. And then there was a $25 million referendum that was originally proposed for November 22 for early child care facilities. We've been pretty successful in being able to use funding available at our quarterly reviews at year-end last year to put towards early childhood facilities. And so it's actually quicker for us to be able to use some of the cash that we have as part of our quarterly reviews to be able to meet some of those needs versus going out to referendum right now when we know we wouldn't be able to sell those bonds for a while. You can see we've also recommended moving our contribution for the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority out of our bond program to the general fund. Right now, we sell about $3 million in bonds every year for the Regional Park Authority. And as a result, we aren't really able to be responsive to some of their changing needs as well. And so we believe moving that contribution to the general fund not only gives us a little bit more capacity in our bond program, but allows us to be more responsive to their needs. And then you can see we're not recommending any changes for schools or Metro or libraries. And I would note that libraries is already on a 6-year schedule. And then on the next slide, you can see what the actual plan is that we're recommending again in fall 22, recommending no referendum. We alternate right now between county and schools. And so schools would have the next referendum in fall of 2023. And then the county would have their next referendum in fall 2024. And again, this is certainly a plan, and I would anticipate that especially those county numbers in 2024 and 2026 are going to change depending on some of the cost escalation that we're seeing with some of our projects. And again, that $100 million for parks was really just a placeholder, and we're going to work with parks to make sure that we size that referendum appropriately. And then my last few slides, this next one is just looking forward. Certainly we're continuing to monitor revenues as well as any actions that the state will take on the state budget. We released our third quarter package to the board. Gosh, was that yesterday? Or we talked about our third quarter package yesterday with the board at budget committee. And we are recommending some additional revenue be put on the table in the current fiscal year. And we anticipate that that's going to impact 2023 as well. So I actually think that as part of our add-on package that goes to the board in April, we'll be identifying some additional revenue, which will be available for the FY 2023 budget. We have had 3 budget committee meetings in March. We just had our last one yesterday. We're certainly going to continue to utilize stimulus dollars. The county has received over $700 million in stimulus funds over the course of the pandemic. And I think that we've been slow and deliberate in how we're utilizing those. And then looking ahead to this next year, certainly the trajectory of the pandemic and the continuing economic impacts are unknown, even though things are certainly looking more positive now, although we are keeping an eye on the conflict in Ukraine to see what impact that may have. Um, a big part of this proposal was compensation for our employees, recognizing some of the recruitment and retention challenges that we've been seeing. And we think that that's likely to remain a challenge for some time. And next year's budget will also be the first year budget impacted by collective bargaining. So that'll also be something that'll be at the forefront of our minds as we put together the 24 budget. On the next slide, just a little bit of information about how to provide input on the 23 budget. I think as a result of the pandemic, we were able to increase the number of ways that the public can participate in the budget process, and so we've continued that. So I think that was a positive change from the pandemic. But certainly residents can submit written testimony, video testimony. You can participate by phone or show up in person, provide your testimony. And our public hearings will begin on April the 12th. But we have the links here if you want to sign up, if you're interested in participating in public hearings. And then my last slide, I believe, is a budget timeline. Again, public hearings are coming up in just a couple of weeks, beginning April 12th. On April 26th, that's when the board marks up the budget. That's really when most of the decisions are made regarding the budget on April 26th. And then on May 10th, that's when the board formally adopts the resolutions for the adopted budget. Again, decisions really made on April 26th, and then May 10th is primarily a formality, but officially the budget is adopted on May 10th. And then the budget fiscal year begins on July 1st. So I'm hoping that I did as good of a job as you would have done, Supervisor Alcorn.
You did a much better job. You did a much better job. Thank you very much, Christina. And now let me see if I can stop sharing my, let's see if we can do that. Stop sharing my application. And now I have a, actually, we don't need to see the whiteboard. Let's see. All right, there we go. So at this point, let's do this. Lisa, as you can see, and let me just make sure I see Christina is unmuted. We have 25 attendees, and I'll just remind everybody how to raise your hand. So if you do want to speak, click on the participants button. And once you click on that participants button, there's a little hand that you put your cursor over and click. That will raise your hand. And Lisa will be looking to see who has their hand raised, and we'll call on you. And I have an old-fashioned pen and paper to take notes for any comments. And if, as you have questions as well, happy to, Christina is still on the line. Oh, and I see Eric has his hand raised. Eric, you are breaking the ice. Go right ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you
Okay.
loud and clear.
Great. Two issues, of course. There was less than $1 million in the budget for environmental issues, and with the all that's going on with climate change, it really seems like an insufficient amount. But I also take a look at the CIP, and we have, between the schools and the county facilities, we have a considerable backlog in updating our HVAC systems and our electrical systems. And those seem to be real opportunities for, should we invest, we can generate considerable savings in our energy use, as well as greenhouse gases. And it seems like every year we defer on particularly HVAC, but also electrical. And it seems like that should really be a priority. or our expanded budget authority or bonding. I really think every year that we put off the investments in those systems, we're really having a big impact on the environment, and we're costing the county money in inefficiency. So I just recommend that we take a look at that much more and raise up. Every year we're showing hundreds of millions of dollars that are in the backlog.
Eric, thank you very much. I wonder, Christina, if you're still unmuted, if you could address both the less than $1 million on environmental climate change in the budget, and then also the backlog, particularly on HVAC system improvements.
Yeah, I think and it is true that in terms of the increase that we have included in the advertised budget, it's right around $1 million in 3 positions. But I do think it's important to note the significant investment that we made as part of last year's carryover, where we put in almost $19 million. So I think a lot of those initiatives that Eric mentioned, we actually are working on. We've just been able to utilize some of the available balances that we've had as part of our quarterly review, specifically year end, to invest. I know our Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination is working diligently, working with our facilities management department to be able to implement some of those more efficient systems. And also, as we're designing new facilities, we're trying to design those facilities to be more efficient as well. And so certainly those costs are included in the projects included in our bond program. So I think we probably could have done a better job in explaining some of the investments that we've made, since that chart only showed the $1 million, but again, almost 19 million that we put in at carryover. So certainly that is a priority of the board, and we've made some significant investments there over the past number of years.
Okay, Eric, thank you very much for that comment. Your comment about the HVAC system reminds me, this is, I guess you could kind of say that in the county, as we look at our capital needs and our renovation needs, that we are also, Lisa, good point. You can put questions in the chat so folks can do that. But Eric, you might say that as a county, we're kind of getting to be middle-aged. We're getting to that point that some of our systems, we're really having to focus more on renovating our systems that are aging out, either because that's just the timing, but also, as with some of our HVAC systems, there are some real efficiencies we can get in updating those. So Eric, thank you. Anything else, Eric, before we go to the next speaker?
I really appreciate it. It may not be particularly sexy to look at the boilers and chillers, but it really is the infrastructure that makes it possible for us to deliver a high quality of life if we've got the infrastructure working well. So thank you for focusing on it.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that. We have next speaker, Judith Shamir. I believe you can go ahead and unmute. Hopefully, I see your hand is up. There you go.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, go right ahead. Thank you.
Good, thanks. I wanted to ask about the funding for housing. I am a resident of the town of Vienna. I'm acutely aware that in Vienna, housing prices are going up at an incredible rate, and that we have historically had great difficulty with providing enough affordable housing to accommodate people that are providing the services for the town, the people in positions like teaching and police and other sort of middle income professionals who just can't live in Vienna. It's too expensive, and it's just getting more so. And part of that is that the perfectly good houses, when they go on the market, are scooped up by developers. In fact, I get calls on a regular basis asking whether I want to sell my house. So I'm not interested, but they're after me to get my house. And then those houses are being sold at high rates, and there's no opportunity for people to get into the smaller, more reasonably priced houses. So my question is whether we're paying close enough attention in that housing budget to preserve existing good housing and to address zoning regulations and other kinds of restrictions that are keeping us from doing more with multiple family housing and other things that could expand the types of housing that we have and have a more equitable distribution of housing within the town and across Hunter Mill as well.
Judith, thank you very, very much for that question and that comment. A couple thoughts, and then I'll see if Christina wants to add anything. But first of all, there is an ongoing policy of the Board of Supervisors to dedicate a half-cent of the real estate tax towards preservation of housing specifically. So basically funding that would go to preserving existing affordable housing. And this is certainly something I support in addition to actually, and I have pretty consistently supported additional funding for not just preservation of affordable housing, but actually to get new affordable housing, because you're right, the need is there in spades. I mean, it's huge. It runs really the gamut of everybody really below the average median income for the region. So the other thing, so I share your priority of that. The other thing I'd say is on the land use side, I'd certainly understand, you're getting calls from developers. Not sure they want your house. I think they really want your land. They want your lot, so they can, put a bigger home there. And I understand that's the way the market is. And in terms of those calls by local government in the town, it's actually the town council in the town of Vienna that make the call on where multifamily housing can go and basically what zoning allows. So I hear you, but on that particular comment, I encourage you to talk with your town council members on that. Judith, anything else?
No, well, I think you answered my question. I understand the role that the town council plays. I would like to continue exploring what other policies and incentives might be put in place more at the county level that then the town of Vienna might hook into to make some changes as well.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. And I should have said, I'm happy to work with the town on preservation projects, on even new projects for affordable housing. So yeah, I would welcome that, and certainly as there's the opportunity and interest, sign me up.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Lisa, it looked like we had a couple of questions in the chat. So let's see.
Would you like me to give them to?
Yeah, that's great, Lisa. Please do.
Okay, just a moment. From Jean, glad to hear that you are considering the needs of FCPA. Highly recommend that significant funding is provided to the Parks Authority, especially in areas of the county that have limited amounts of green space. During the pandemic, parks and green areas were heavily used and most likely will continue to be in high demand.
All right, Jean, thank you very much for that comment. Appreciate, first of all, your support for our schools. and also for our parks and those programs. Yeah, I was going to say the pandemic, I think, taught all of us. I actually I ended up I haven't done the entire cross county trail, but I think I've done about 2/3 of it. I need to finish it off down South County, but um, such incredible resources we have that even during the pandemic, we're never crowded. Anyway, I do definitely support that. I did have a conversation, and I know Christina Jackson has had conversation with our parks representatives and officials, and there are some concerns, and I hear them about, in particular, the new bonding schedule and what that's going to mean, in particular for, um, in particular for the renovations, the necessary renovations for a number of our recreation centers around the county. I have to say, in Hunter Mill, we don't have any yet. And that's on my mind as well. So I'm looking at making sure that we get on the list eventually, at least, to get a recreation center in the Hunter Mill district. There are plans for that in Reston. But in the meantime, we have several recreation centers that are getting to the 30, even 40 years and up in age, that their their renovation needs are becoming critical. So that is a priority, as well as it's not like I think we have too much green space in secured at this point. There is a long-standing goal of our park authority to get to 10% of the Fairfax County land area. I believe we're at something like 9.7% or 9.8%. So I would love to see us get to that goal, but I do realize that it requires both funding and probably some creative approaches. So, Jean, thank you for that question and comment. Lisa, do you want to read the next one?
Oh, sure. This is a related question from Amy. I'm confused that 4 million is listed for culture and recreation. That's parks and libraries. It seems woefully inadequate. I saw a version that showed 29 million in the general fund for parks.
Yeah, Christina, if you could jump in on this, I believe that may have something to do with their revenue fund program as well.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of things to point out here that, yes, the incremental increase from last year's budget to this year's budget in the area of culture and recreational opportunities is 4.75 million. What's actually included in the parks and libraries program area in the general fund in the base in 23 is a little over 60 million. But I do think it's important, to your point, Supervisor Alcorn, the way that we fund parks, and really, and this is an area where we've had a lot of conversation with staff this year, especially given some of the feedback that we've received, is that we need to do a better job in terms of being able to demonstrate and show the support that the county actually provides to parks. Because yes, the general fund budget for parks is right around 30 million in 23. That doesn't include the fringe benefits that we pay for general fund parks employees, which is about 11, I think. That doesn't include the debt service that we pay for park bonds. That's covered by the county as well. And so actually, when I went back and took a look at the county's investments for parks in this current fiscal year in 22, we were actually over $75 million. So I think that's something that we're going to work on in terms of being able to be transparent in terms of those investments. And again, as you mentioned, Supervisor Alcorn, I've had lots of conversations with J. Cole over the past few weeks, especially, in that we want to make sure that we're responsive to their needs, both operationally and in terms of the capital side as well.
Hey, Supervisor Alcorn, we have another question.
Okay, great. And actually, Lisa, let me go back and say one more thing to Amy. I appreciate her comment on the parks, and I also saw she pointed out we've got to staff the parks. It's not just getting the land, but actually making sure that we have staff to manage that, manage those parks. And I totally agree. We're having some interesting conversations at the board level and also with senior park officials. You know, about, I guess, probably about 40 years ago, the Park Authority made the strategic decision with the support of the Board of Supervisors at that time to really move down a path of maximizing income from sources that basically where the Park Authority could generate fee-based income. And typically that's golf courses and recreation centers. So over the years, those revenue from those have not only paid for the operating costs of those facilities, but also have been used to pay other costs of the Park Authority. So, you know, we're getting to the point though where we probably should look at that balance, and you know, we might be needing to put more of an investment of our general fund monies into parks and to the staff that pay for parks. It creates some, I guess, some potential imbalances. And I don't know, I guess maybe in Hunter Mill, since we don't have a rec center, maybe we're on the positive side of that imbalance. But on the other hand, it also creates challenges when the Park Authority sets their fee rates for the coming year. And then, for example, the county sets, we set for all county employees compensation rates after they set their fee rates. So I know that's a challenge, and there are other issues like that we're talking through. But Amy, thank you very much for flagging that. Lisa, I believe there were additional question or two at least. If you could go ahead and read the another question.
Yeah, sure. Here is this second, another question. The roads are extremely over-designed for motor vehicles, and the master plan for the 3 metro stations, Wheelie, RTC, and Herndon Monroe Park and Ride leaves a lot to be desired. What action will be taken to address this, and how can people get involved?
Oh, wow. Good timing on that question. When I became supervisor in January of 2020, my first motion at a board meeting was to update and, well, first to review and to update Reston's comprehensive plan, which includes all 3 of the metro stations in that question. And that process has now been underway for almost 2 years. The task force was created back in April or May of 2020. They've put out interim recommendations of what they would recommend the updated Reston comprehensive plan look like. Lisa, if you or somebody else maybe could put a link to those recommendations, and we are also in the process of the task force getting input from staff in May. So just in a couple of months, we will be going through a series of public meetings and engagements to provide information about what these recommended updates and changes to the Reston Comprehensive Plan are, including some tweaks to the plans for the 3 metro station areas. And I would very much encourage you, Kripa, to participate in those. Contact my office if you happen to be part of a group or maybe a cluster association that would like to host a public meeting or participate in a public meeting on these changes. Happy to loop you into that. We're going to have a pretty intense, I think, summer of public discussion about what Reston's future plans should look like, and would welcome your participation in that. So thank you for that question. Okay, Lisa, were there other questions?
Yes. Hi, Supervisor Alcorn. Thank you for the Board of Supervisors' commitment to raising its affordable housing goal to 10,000 new units by 2034, and for your commitment to adding 1,000 here in Hunter Mill. I wanted to ask how reduced real estate and property tax rate would affect our ability to reach that goal.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Amanda, for that. And for those of you that didn't catch this at the board meeting last week, the Board of Supervisors increased our goal, countywide goal for affordable housing units, new affordable housing units, or additional affordable housing units, from 5,000 by 2034 to 10,000 by 2034. That's fine, I guess, as a countywide goal, but I want to be a little more ambitious in Hunter Mill, and set a Hunter Mill goal of 1,000 additional units by the end of 2027. So basically during the next 5 years. It is something I'm committed to. These are units that are really important for working families, for seniors on a limited income, and are really important for the overall economy. I mean, let's face it, I think we learned in the pandemic that many of our most essential workers don't make that much money, and struggle with the housing costs in this area. We think, I know I at least have come to value making sure that our essential workers do have the opportunity to live in this area. And I am looking forward to making some real progress on that. So your question is how reduced real estate and property tax rates would affect our ability to reach that goal. The short answer is it depends on how much we would reduce the tax rate. The more money that we would put into affordable housing, the faster we'll get to our goals. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. So more funding for affordable housing is something I have supported and I will continue to support. But I also want to make sure that we don't place too much of a burden on our residential homeowners through the real estate tax. But it's a great question, and frankly, I'm looking for every opportunity to put more into our affordable housing programs to really catch up, because we're pretty far behind. So thank you very much for that question.
A question from Amy Martin. I'm going to unmute her.
Oh, great. Amy, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that you are talking about the parks, because they have been such a lifesaver, literally, over the course of this pandemic. The use is increasing by about 60%, and that's just counting the ones where it's a car that comes in. They don't count the people that walk in. But you really aptly caught the issue of revenue-based parks versus general fund-based parks, and the revenue centers are in a little bit better shape. Those like Green Spring Gardens, Dyke Meadows, the Huntley Meadows, Dyke Marsh, Frying Pan Park, Nottaway House, all of the latter two are in your district. There's 34 parks in your district. So it's not just the W&OD trail, but they are understaffed dramatically because of the lack of revenue, and there are positions on the books that the managers aren't allowed to fill. And what we get is parks overflowing with trash because there's nobody to pick them up. We have, the Friends of Green Spring have bought for years all of the plant material that goes into the park. The county doesn't spend a penny on it. And we can't get enough staff gardeners to supervise the volunteers who are volunteering to put it in. It's that bad. We have programs that haven't gone on because education programs for kids that they can't hold because they don't have staff. They have revenue generating programs. They have historic houses that need to be renovated, and none of this is covered, and they're falling further and further behind. So could we look at some of that 80 million that's on the table, or some of those stimulus funds? What can we do to help catch up with the parks?
Amy, it's a great question, and I think the short answer is yes. I think we can. There's a related issue. It hasn't come up yet, but about, what was it, 6 or 8 months ago, Christina, the Board of Supervisors directed staff to identify an additional $100 million over the next 6 years, specifically for pedestrian improvements, sidewalks, trails, crosswalks. So some of these are going to be in parks. Some of them are going to be improvements there. Some of them are going to be along streets. But I think it's also very important to think about how we make sure that our parks are accessible by means other than just cars, particularly parks that are in pretty close proximity, and making those connections that perhaps don't exist or are substandard currently. But the short answer is, could we use some of that 80 million for parks? Yeah, we could. And that's one of the things that, frankly, this town hall helps me think through some of these options and helps me with prioritization. So thank you.
And if I may, Supervisor Alcorn, also talking about stimulus funding, a board matter that you had presented back in October, along with the chairman, we allocated over $7.5 million in our ARPA funds for parks to address some of their deferred maintenance needs. And we anticipate when we get our next tranche of ARPA funding, which we're still waiting to hear from the feds when we anticipate that, the plan was to provide some additional support for parks. So we are able to use some of our federal stimulus funds to help out parks, and the county has taken some action to do that already.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I do think we need to focus on the staffing issues as much as anything else. The hardscape is important and the maintenance is important, but you really need the people.
Yeah, Amy, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially, I don't know if everybody realizes how much we depend on our park system for our green corridors. Basically, we've got hundreds of miles of stream valley across Fairfax County owned by the Park Authority, and it's not that requires some management and some attention from a habitat management. We've got invasive species issues. We spent a lot of time recently at the Board of Supervisors talking about running bamboo. Good grief. We definitely have needs that require staff. So thank you, Amy. Lisa, did we have another question or two?
We have Dinos, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but he has a question.
Okay, great. Please, you're unmuted, Dinos, I believe. Whoop. He's unmuted, but we can't hear him. Okay, let's go. Lisa, do we have any questions in the chat? I actually see one. Kripa says, speaking of parks, I have one more question. How feasible is it to create a Fairfax connector route between between Wheelie Metro and Great Falls. I'm actually pretty sized that such a route does not already exist. Oh boy, that's a good question. Currently, the most northerly route from Wheelie on the Fairfax connector basically goes up Wheelie Avenue. It's the 558, the new 558. It used to be the 554, and then gets as far north as the intersection of Wheelie Avenue and Reston Parkway, and doesn't quite make it across Route 7 into Great Falls. These connector routes were recently updated once we get Silverline Phase 2 open, and those changes will kick in, but there was not a route basically connecting the Wheelie Metro and Great Falls. So I think there is a Fairfax connector bus that goes up and down Route 7. I can't remember that route number off the top of my head. But that does go, I believe, down to the Spring Hill station. So, and I certainly with all the construction of the Route 7 widening underway, hopefully that bus will continue to get service and basically get through the rush hour traffic. Okay. So that's all I know on that one. Are there other questions? Does anyone, if anyone wants to, oh, Great Falls Park. Honestly, Kripa, I don't know. Great Falls Park is in the Drainsville district. And I don't think, frankly, I don't think, well, as a matter of fact, I'm sure there are no plans, I would have heard of this, to connect those two. But certainly if there's demand for it and it would be utilized, there's a good argument, be happy to consider it. So feel free to send me any additional thoughts on why you think that might be needed, and happy to look into that. I do, by the way, chair the board's transportation committee. So, I mean, as with everything, I pay attention to more than 100 mil district, but in particular on transportation issues. So any other questions? If somebody has a question, feel free to click on the participants button and then go to raise hand, or you can put the question in the chat. Are there any other questions, Lisa, that you see? Oh, I see one right here. All right, thank you, Kripa. All right, I see from James, how much of the COVID stimulus money has been spent, and does it have to be used by a specific date? And he's in listening mode only. Christina, I'm going to throw that one to you because that sounds like a great question. I'm pretty sure I'm close in my head, but tell us what the answer is.
So we have a few pots of money that we've received through stimulus funding. So the first big tranche of funding that we got through the CARES Coronavirus Relief Fund, the deadline was this past December 31st, 2021. So those funds have been spent. We're reconciling right now, and we're hoping that we are able to do our final reporting for Treasury by the end of June. The second large tranche of funding that we've received was through the American Rescue Plan Act. That was $222 million. So far, we've received half of that. So we've received 111. The board has allocated of that 111, and I have my memo right here, about 96 million. But I would note that a lot of that, I haven't looked at the actuals, but I don't think that we've done a lot of spending for those allocations yet. The board has allocated, but we're still working on the actual spending. So there's still 15 million or so that the board has not even allocated out of that first tranche of ARPA dollars. And then the second tranche of ARPA dollars, which again, we haven't received yet, the guidelines there was that we wouldn't receive it sooner than 12 months after receiving the first tranche, because it has to be super complicated, right? And so we would anticipate that probably the earliest we would receive that second tranche would maybe be in the May timeframe. Of that second tranche of 111, the board has allocated 15 million for affordable housing and 5 million to support the capital area food bank. So there's still $91 million of that funding that's unallocated. We do bi-monthly memos to the board to keep the board informed of any additional stimulus funds that we've received, how staff is recommending that we utilize them. A lot of board members will do board matters when they have larger items that they would like to see funded through stimulus dollars. And I would note that, right now I've just touched on the big pieces, but we've received a lot, many smaller stimulus grants and awards that are for specific initiatives. And all of those are outlined in our stimulus memos as well. And again, that's how we get to that just over $700 million that the county has received. So we still have some flexibility. Oh, in terms of the deadline, so the ARPA funding, those funds have to be encumbered or obligated by December 2024, and ultimately they have to be spent by December 2026. So I've said a few times that, particularly with the ARPA funding, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And, we certainly need to be thoughtful about how we use those funds, but we do have a little bit of time to use those.
Yeah, Christina, thank you. And I'm just going to give a shout out to you and your team. As you mentioned, it's not just the big CARES Act, the big ARPA funds, but it's also a lot of smaller stimulus and COVID-related funding through FEMA and probably a dozen or more different federal agencies. And you and your team have done a fantastic job identifying those and going after those funds. Because it is so important. I mean, I've heard everybody today and your support for a range of different things, all of which cost money. And so even though that these are one-time, this is one-time funding, one of the things I am actually very focused on is I want to make sure that this one-time funding that we're getting in this extraordinary time by the federal government is meaningful for the longer term as well. Let's make sure that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we have some things that are tangible, that are either permanent in terms of land or facilities, or we have programs that have been advanced by this generosity from the federal government, which really is once in a generation. So thank you for that question. It is something, considering our housing needs, our parks needs, our open space needs, our environmental needs relating to climate and investments that we need to make there that Eric started the questions with tonight. All those things are in my mind, and I very much appreciate those being raised by everyone here tonight. Let me just ask, are there any other questions? Oh, there are multiple hands.
Yes, Supervisor, I have Paul.
Oh, great. Yeah, please, let's go. We're scheduled to go till 9, so we have a few more minutes. Yes.
You never want to be the last one standing between everyone and the end of the call. So I apologize.
You're not the last, I don't think, Paul, but go ahead.
I just wanted to bring up, I support additional affordable housing, but I was looking over the budget for the last number of years, and it appears that a lot of money has gone into affordable rental housing and very little into affordable home ownership. And, we can discuss equity issues at another date, but the populations that are most harmed by that in terms of not being able to get on the housing ladder are those that are mentioned in the One Fairfax plan, number one. Number two is a lot of the rental housing that's going up is affordable rental is for 50, 60, 70% of AMI. And a lot of that is pretty close to what can be found at the market level. So I would just strongly encourage the board to allocate more money to down payment assistance, which is really what's needed for folks to get onto the housing ladder, and also that then saves affordable housing over time because you put a deed restriction on that. And and I think you just made the point where you can then have that affordable unit for 60, 70, 80 years, as opposed to a lot of the rental housing has timeframes of 20 to 25. And so that is the pitch for affordable homeownership. And also I went to an affordable homeownership session, and I think I think there were 800 people there for 10 units that were going to become available. So I think the demand is there. And the last thing I'd point out, just on the preservation of affordable housing, I would be concerned, and I would encourage you whenever this comes up, a lot of that is by developers who have developed the housing in the past, and now it's, needs a little refresh. Well, that would be, if you didn't do the refresh, it would stay affordable because that's what the market would bear. And so it just seems that in some cases, and I've seen this in other jurisdictions, that just turns into subsidizing somebody doing an upgrade of the units, where if you allocate that money elsewhere, you would still maintain that as affordable housing stock, but without them expending the capital. So that's the pitch.
Paul, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Could I just explore a little bit what you were just saying? You're talking about basically market rate rental housing that basically the rents get raised, and that's often in conjunction with improvements, sprucing up or whatever, by the landlord. And what is that what you're saying?
No, I think is it Stonegate was approved or
Yes.
is on. So I believe that was affordable housing prior to this
Correct.
recent request. Okay. So what I'm saying is you're basically paying for affordable housing twice. Because
Yes.
if you didn't do the improvements, it would make it would still be affordable housing stock because they're not going to tear it down and get $0. So it would be maintained as affordable housing stock. So you're basically paying more money to the same developer to get the same amount of units, which I think there are probably better ways to use that money.
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much. I would point out, and Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe for that particular project, there actually is a lot of money going into the rehabilitation of those existing affordable units without adding units. But I believe those are all being financed in a way that basically the combination of tax credits and I believe rents coming in will pay for that. Christina, do you know the financing on that particular project?
I don't. That sounds right to me, but I'm afraid I don't know the specifics of that one.
Paul, I'll look into that, but you're right. It's something worth looking into. So thank you, Paul. And the other thing I did want to flag, and Paul, you talked about down payment and the importance of ownership and not just rental. That is something we've talked about some at the board. Christina, do you have any insights? I know the vast majority of our affordable units are rental and managed by, many cases, the Redevelopment and Housing Authority. But Christina, are you up to date on initiatives to assist ownership of affordable units?
So yeah, a majority of our focus is on the rental piece. I know that actually right now, housing is is working on a memo to the board, talking about some of the funds that have become available for first-time home buyers. So there actually is an update on home ownership initiatives that I believe Tom Fleetwood is working on right now to provide to the board. So I think there's going to be some information that's forthcoming.
Okay, so thank you, Christina. I knew we discussed it, and I thought we had asked for more information, and that explains it. And I was hoping I didn't miss something yet.
Yeah, no, you haven't missed it yet. Nope.
Okay, Paul, thank you very, very much. That is something I will keep in mind in terms of increasing the emphasis on purchase as well, purchase units. So thank you, Paul. Anything else, Paul, on any of those?
No, just appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much for participating. Lisa, are there other hands up out there?
I don't think so. Judith, I don't know if Judith still has her hand up or if she has an additional question. I'll unmute her to see if she does.
I think I see applause, but I don't, it's not a hand. I'm not sure I'm looking at this right. Judith, did you have anything else?
No, I didn't. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And Lisa, are there any questions in the chat? And thank you for helping keep us all straight here. I don't see any additional questions. Does anyone have any final questions or comments they would like to make? Okay, all right. Well, listen, thank you everybody for participating in this. This is extremely helpful for me, and hopefully some of the information you were looking for you got. Thank you very much, Christina, for the presentation and the answers to the questions, and frankly to all the work that you and your team do to basically get all this in a digestible way, and frankly to keep our AAA bond rating, which we're all very proud of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, so if there are no other questions, Lisa, last call. Do you see any other questions? And Lisa did put in the chat, feel free to email huntermill@fairfaxcounty.gov. That's how you can reach my office, and happy to get back to you with information on if anybody is looking. Oh, I do see one person would like to speak. Wow, just in time, Yvonne, you just made it. Lisa, could you unmute Yvonne Johnson? Wow, that's just under the just got there, Yvonne. I was about to close everything out. Lisa, do you see Yvonne there? Okay, hold on just a sec. Let me text Lisa. She's having audio problems. So unmute Yvonne, please. All right. Okay, let's see if we can get Yvonne unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, there you are. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, Supervisor Alcorn. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm new to this platform, so I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, and I did put a couple questions in the chat to the host. Not sure why those weren't seen, but my questions are about funding for the Park Authority. I am recently retired from the Park Authority. I've been retired about a year. I highly recommend it. It's wonderful. But you know, over the many years, it seems like less and less tax-based funding has been coming to the Park Authority. At one point in the past, it was as much as 2%, and now it's down to about 0.6% is my understanding. So, you know, I'm wondering how the Park Authority can get funding to support equity initiatives. And
Yes.
I'm also wondering what is the plan with the new fees that people are paying for bags in the grocery stores? Is any of that potentially coming to the Park Authority?
Oh, great question, Yvonne. I think with the discussion, at least that I've been a part of in the last even just few weeks, has raised the equity issues on a couple of different levels relating to the Park Authority. First of all, there's some equity issues relating to the fees and how much park operations are funded by these fees and how much are funded by general taxpayer revenue. In addition, there are some very significant equity-related initiatives that I understand the Park Authority is wanting to do, some of which I very much support, but those are going to be very difficult to do under the existing fee structure and really the budget as it's currently supported by those fees. So I think we are going to need to look at how we do that and see if there might be a more equitable way to pay for those services, and frankly, make sure that park services are available to everybody in the county, and not just those of us that are most fortunate or happen to live in areas of the county that are already relatively green. So thank you, Yvonne, for flagging that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Yvonne just slipped in under the radar there.
Hi, Supervisor Alcorn, I'm back on, and I don't see any other questions.
Okay, very good. All right, well, listen, it's 8:44, so we'll give 16 minutes of everyone's life back here. But again, contact my office with any additional concerns, questions, issues. Thank you, Christina, again. Thank you, Lisa and team on the Hunter Mill office, and have a good evening, everybody.
Good evening.